Hi, folks, and welcome to today's Security Info Watch webinar series, where we will be discussing 4 biometric access control trends you can't ignore in 2023. I'd like to thank our sponsor, Alcatraz AI, for bringing this event to you. Hi, everyone. I'm Steve Lasky. I'm the editorial director for SecurityInfoWatch.com and our print magazine, Security Business, Security Technology Executive, and Locksmith Ledger, along with our web portal, Security Info Watch. I'll be your host for today's webinar. Right now, I'm joined by Greg Sarrail and Ted Druart with Alcatraz AI. For those unfamiliar with Alcatraz AI, they deliver a simple, secure, frictionless facial authentication biometric solution for autonomous access that solves some of the most difficult challenges of creating and maintaining safe spaces. With 2023 just around the corner, I'm excited to hear what these gentlemen have to say about the future of access control. But before we kick off our event today, let me review just a few housekeeping items. The presentation is both live and interactive, so you can ask questions at any time via the Ask a Question box in the presentation window. We will answer as many of these questions as we're able to get to during the Q&A portion at the end of the webinar. If you have any technical difficulties during the webinar, just type your issue into the Ask a Question box and a member of our team will assist you. If you are running any pop-up blocking software, you will need to disable it now to view the webinar. In addition, it is recommended that you close down all other applications for better performance. And for your convenience, this presentation will be available on demand on our on-demand viewing within 24 hours of this live event. A reminder email will be sent to all registrants containing a link to the presentation for on-demand viewing. It will also be accessible from the SIW homepage under the media portion of our site. We encourage you to ask questions at any time during the event by using the Q&A tool to the left side of your screen. If you are unable to get to your questions during this web chat, we'll do our best to reach out to you afterwards. And just a reminder, you may also qualify for CEU credits following this webinar. If you would like to receive a certificate of attendance for today's event, please remain logged on for the duration of the webinar, and you will automatically receive your certificate via email within 24 hours. It'll be up to you to approach your association or group that you're trying to receive credits from to see if these transfer over. Finally, today's webinar, including the audio and slides, will be archived on our site for a period of 6 months. So, with all the housekeeping issues out of the way, let's introduce our speakers for today. Tad Druart is the Vice President of Marketing for Alcatraz AI. Tad is a transformational marketing executive, brand builder, and a growth architect who provides the vision and strategy to lead organizations to increase levels of awareness, market share, and revenue growth. He is a trusted advisor and consummate business leader who has delivered results for venture-backed startups, private equity growth and turnaround opportunities, as well as Fortune 100 companies. He has successfully positioned cloud and SaaS offerings against incumbent competitors and transitioned 2 markets from premise-based solutions to the cloud. He has also led communications and investor relations through 2 IPOs on the NASDAQ market. Greg Sarrail is the Senior Vice President for Sales at Alcatraz AI. Greg is a sales leader with over 2 decades of experience driving business strategy and building effective marketing and sales teams to deliver secure identity solutions that make the world a safer place while improving user convenience. Greg is an expert in managing high-performing global teams and developing strategic partnerships, reseller channels, and OEM relationships that deliver outstanding sales performance. Greg's experience ranges from startups to small companies to divisions within established technology companies. Greg has an MBA degree in international business. So without further ado, I'll step back and turn this over to Tad and let you and Greg begin the conversation.
Thank you very much, Steve. We're excited to be here today to talk to you about the trends that we see having an effect on the use of biometrics in the access control market. Over the past several months, our team's spoken with hundreds of your peers, security professionals, IT professionals in the marketplace, and we've asked them what they're seeing, what are the business drivers, what's keeping them up at night. And those conversations led to our first annual Trends ebook. And today we're going to discuss some of those trends, those that are having, we think, the biggest impact on the industry, and a little bit about where we see where it's going and what we can do to be proactive and address these. So we'll talk first about that frictionless access control is the future. And it's really not the future. The future is now. We're seeing this adoption grow at a great rate, and we'll talk a great deal about that. Privacy laws continue to change, but there is clarity coming, and we'll talk a little bit about what we're seeing there and some of the things that our customers are doing to embrace that need for privacy, to help their end users, and to get biometrics moving throughout their business. As environments get more complex, as the security challenges become more complex and more important, we're seeing the need to add multimodal authentication. How do we make sure people, places, and our assets stay secure, yet not make it so cumbersome that people work around the processes and the systems that we put in there? Finally, we'll talk a little bit about what we're seeing. We're seeing a great deal has been made, and we're seeing a great deal of growth in the cloud, adoption of the cloud. But we're also seeing now a new, more edge computing growth tied to that cloud, really providing people with both the best of both worlds, the best of the power on-site and performance on-site, but that ability to scale and grow that comes with the cloud. So we'll talk about all of those things and answer your questions and move from there. Greg, pass it over to you. We're talking about right now how the world is going. Frictionless is the future. But the expectations of frictionless are about improved administration and improved end user experience. So what are we seeing, and what do we learn about frictionless in the marketplace?
Sure. There's been a lot of talk about frictionless, and just many times it's thought about from the end user's perspective, about the end user coming in and not having to do something as they enter a secure space. So whether that's grabbing a card or placing their finger down or putting a PIN code in. So the more that we can remove the need for someone to act and actually have it be autonomous, where they can approach an area, and if they belong, they enter. If they don't belong, they're prevented from entering. Then that's kind of where the market's been heading. That being said, when we talk about frictionless, it's been focused more on the end user and less on the administrative side. And so we've seen, we're trying to make that term hold across the whole implementation, from the initial instance of establishing the product, getting it on the wall, and actually connecting it to backend systems. So, and then managing that process and the access system all the way through, as well as from the end user perspective, and allowing those end users, if they belong, again, to have a frictionless experience.
So as you're seeing that frictionless experience, it's some of the drivers as we're talking to prospects and to our customers it's some of it driven by the pandemic, people not wanting to touch things and exposure and the safety of theirs. But more and more, it's driven by just the efficiency of the business and the new hybrid work models, where you may have had somebody at the front desk or a security guard who kind of knew everybody that was coming in. They'd present their card and say, "Hello, Joe," "Hello, Jane," and move through. But it's now, with the changing of work environments, changing hours. So how is that changing what we're seeing when it comes to the frictionless environment?
Yeah, that's a good point, Tad. I think in general, that social dynamic has changed quite a bit. If we go back 3 years ago, you kind of knew everybody around the office. You recognized everyone's face. They were there most days out of the week. And now with the pandemic, more people working remotely, offices opening up and now wanting people to come back to the office. There are a lot of new faces. People have left. We're seeing the largest change in personnel changing jobs now than we have in recent history. So there's a lot of new faces, and so to automate that process so that the security guard doesn't just nod or nod off to sleep, depending if they're paying attention or not. So whether you have a security guard or not, being able to have a layered approach to where you can have different areas that are authenticating those that belong at different parts of the building, not just the front door, lends itself to a safer environment.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit as we again talk to some of our end users. Things in healthcare, some areas make sense where they want to be touchless and look at things a little bit differently. But we're also seeing that touchless in corporate headquarters, in places like stadiums and other places. What are those benefits around the different use cases besides the improved user experience? And really, let's look at that maybe from the kind of, if you will, the cost savings and the benefits to the administrative user when we go to a frictionless environment.
Sure. You touched on two things there. So I'll touch on cost as well as the back-end system. So on the cost side, people consider when you're using just a card for access systems, they just think about the cost of the card. But what about those users that leave those cards at home? What about those that lose their cards? So you have a replacement cost, but you also have the loss of productivity as it relates to them doing their job. They should have entered the space if they belonged, and then they can start doing their job. If they have to go spend 20 minutes, go talk to an administrator who may or may not be there and get a temporary badge, there's a cost associated with that loss of productivity. So being able to automate that process does save time and save money. On the back end piece, the administrative side, when people look at using some other type of authentication other than a card, which is predominantly used in the US, they now have to think about, how am I going to deploy this solution? And so they really should be looking at the type of solutions that can layer on top of the existing infrastructure as they have today. And so if a solution such as Alcatraz is able to layer on top of the existing card-based system, but provide another layer of security and tie into the existing access control system with no changes on the back end, then obviously that's going to be of greater benefit, so that they can start to gain the benefits at the end user level very quickly. So getting up and running, in a number of hours versus days or weeks, and then not having some back end system that they have to manage in addition to their current access control system. So using the access control system that's in place today.
I think that's one of the things is in my short time here with the company and talking with some of our customers and prospects, is that frustration with the integration of systems. It's been hyped and people know that we need these systems to integrate, but there's also a lot of great value in just having a system that works natively together. And then, there was some data we were looking at a couple of weeks ago about any two systems that are integrated together, they have to be touched 8 to 10 times by the IT team or by the security team, just to make sure things work together when things get upgraded or systems change. So while we need that integration to make sure that we're getting the data shared and all that, we also need to look at how we get things put together natively so we don't have some of those challenges as well. I don't know if you want to add anything around that from your perspective.
I mean, I'll touch on that when we talk a bit more about cloud, because that's a great benefit to using the cloud. I'll come back to that point. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think then that kind of leads into that next thing, because the other one of the balances in that frictionless environment to do that is the use of biometrics, and that's led to a lot of confusion, the privacy. Greg and I were talking last night, when Apple first introduced facial authentication on the iPhone, there was a flurry of stories and concerns about privacy. But now when you look at it, it's arguably the most often used way a person logs into their cell phone. IATA, which is the International Travel Association, just completed a survey. And in that survey, 73% of travelers said they would share biometric data if it improved the process, if it improved efficiency and improved security. And so we're seeing the end users really leaning in toward biometrics, maybe like never before. But that same survey said that their top concern is data protection. It's a top priority. And it's not just about the protection of the data, how you store it and keep it secure, but how do you use it, and what the processes are. And so one of the things that we've been looking at a great deal is the privacy laws. And as we talk to our customers, talk to their legal advisors, HR, and end users, there's a lot of confusion, a lot of concern on what's going on in the privacy world right now. But what we're seeing is a couple of different things. These privacy laws are becoming more localized. In the U.S., that means each state has little variances on the laws. There's BIPA that started in Illinois, California has CCPA. Certain cities are banning video recognition or facial recognition systems in surveillance modes. But one of the things that's going on there is we're seeing clarity in the process and the procedures. All of these laws appear to be building on one another and leveraging what works in one location for another location. And there's when you look at the cases that are being settled now and solved now, and when you look at those laws, there's a difference between using video facial recognition for surveillance and using it for access control. And that's where we're seeing a lot of clarity in the system. So those local regulations, we're seeing a lot of the things like BIPA right now. If you look back at GDPR several years ago, there was a flurry of lawsuits, a flurry of settlements. Now businesses have adopted the right processes, the right procedures, and they're implementing them. We still have cases like the news this morning where a large company was fined by the European Union for some GDPR violations. But if you look back at that, those were violations 2, 3, 4 years ago, and they've improved their processes and their systems now to prevent that. And I think that's what we're seeing on the biometric front too, is that while the regulations are becoming localized, regionalized, they're building on one another. We're starting to see clarity. And the reality of that, and you navigate these new laws, is you have to put privacy front and center. So staying compliant is really a simple kind of 4-tier approach. I say simple. You always want to, I'm not a lawyer. I play one on webinars, but you want to make sure that you're doing things right. Put privacy first. Make sure you have the proper policies in front. Be upfront with your users. Let them know that they are going to, you are going to use facial authentication, facial recognition, other biometrics to help them with the access control. Let them know exactly how it's going to be used. Virtually all of these laws that are coming in require an opt-in and an opt-out process. So similar to GDPR, where people can opt in or opt out of use of their data, you have to give the user the ability to opt in and opt out. And that has to be a very clean process. It can be part of onboarding. It can be part of the enrollment process. It can be something that they actually have to do. And not here necessarily to sell the rock today, but our product requires everybody opt in. And then you get that backed up in writing. That makes you more safe and secure. The other aspect of these laws is that particularly when it comes to facial biometrics, that you're using responsible systems, meaning that it's more of a one-to-one match of a face to a data set versus one-to-many, and that those algorithms used people that opted into the process versus random facial photos from the internet or from other places. So using responsible systems provides a little more protection. At the end of the day, though, on all these, it's being proactive, staying in front of it. We're working with several attorneys getting with customers as they adopt the product, and reaching out to one last week to talk about, are we telling the right story here? And he was really excited. He's like, most companies, whether they're a vendor or a manufacturer or vendor, or whether the end user customer, they don't reach out to the lawyers until after there's been a problem. So this is an area that if you want to use biometrics, get ahead of it. Work with a partner that's going to give you best practices and checklists. There's a lot of good things that can be done. And again, it's all about being proactive and staying in front of it, and helping educate your end users, administrators, lawyers, all the people involved in that. So, Greg, anything else you wanted to add on as we talk about?
I think you covered it well. Thanks, Tad. The one other thing that I would add is if you think about how you identified yourself, go back to your airport analogy there. So if you're going to the airport and somebody asks for your ID, you quickly pull it out and they look at the number and you don't think much of it. But when that number has been replaced by your face, now the sensitivity increases. People aren't concerned about something that may relate to their identity, but they are concerned about their face. And so making sure that when you're moving to autonomous access, that a solution that's being looked at is not retaining your face, is not retaining an image of your face, but is in fact is retaining a number in the end, a hashed algorithmic number that's encrypted. That's what's stored on the back end and can't be recreated into your face. That resolves a lot of the privacy concerns that individuals may have around somebody having a record of their face. Even though they were filmed by several, or at least recorded by several cameras as they walked up to the door, it's anonymized data. Their identity isn't connected to that face. And when you're connecting that facial profile or data to that individual's access rights, that's when the sensitivity increases. So again, that comes back to using responsible systems that make sure that they're not retaining images and that the data that is stored is encrypted and stored and transferred in the right way.
Yeah, and I think that's the key point. And I think we're working on a use case, a case study with one of our customers who did a really nice job of putting it in the rock, talking to their employees about how it would be used on turnstiles as they entered the business. And they had 4 turnstiles there. Initially, they put the facial authentication, the rock, on one of the turnstiles, let everybody know they could opt into that. And within a matter of days, they wanted rocks for the other turnstiles because the employees realized that their data was protected, and the ease of getting into the building, going through the turnstile with the facial authentication, not having to worry about bringing a badge and all that. We saw the end users quickly opt into that. But again, they needed to know that privacy was protected, it was done right, and a process in place. So I think we're seeing it with air travel. I think we're going to see that in the access control within the building environment as well. And that kind of leads to that building environment. Some of the changes in the work environment, Greg, we've talked about. We're seeing the growth of zero trust environments. Things like tailgating and other things are becoming more and more problematic for businesses. But multimodal authentication is becoming more and more important. But going back to, we talked about this, and I'll let you lead on it, but frictionless, the employees and the employer don't want to slow things down. They don't want to make it so hard to get in and out of the area that people start working around it. So talk to us about what you're seeing on the multimodal authentication and the demands we're seeing in that marketplace.
Sure. So people come back to the enterprise to get their job done and to collaborate. And that's why people are coming into that built environment. So to remove any barriers to allow the right people in is obviously the goal for the security team. And then preventing any adverse events from happening. So when we start to talk about multimodal, very often that's thought of in a very secure space. It's the data center door. It's access to a C-suite. It's access to areas in the healthcare you mentioned earlier. It might be access to the prenatal care areas. So there's typically a step up that's required when multimodal is a requirement, often driven by compliance, often driven by whether it's protection of the data that sits behind that door in a data center, or financial information, or personal information. So that's, I'd say, the traditional area where multimodal authentication has been required. What we're seeing now is by making multimodal as fast as single factor, it's another layer of protection that people are providing beyond just that secure area and bringing it closer to the front door. And so that may be in a hallway where a card was used in the past. Now card and face are combined to add that second layer of security. So if somebody got in to one access point, they aren't able to go deeper within that facility. So we are seeing adoption of multimodal in more than just those high secure areas, because it's easier to use multimodal authentication, a multi-factor.
And Greg, too, if you would touch a little bit on too about that, this is where that area of working natively with the existing access control becomes real important to the customers.
Sure. I think in the past, you wouldn't layer on a fingerprint biometric just because it's a nice to have. There's a big back end that has to be dealt with, an AFIS database where the automated fingerprint identification system is where all the matching occurs. You have to have good connection between wherever that endpoint is and the server. So there's a lot that goes into deploying that multimodal or multi-factor authentication. PIN pad readers, a little bit easier, been around a lot longer, but not very secure, right? People can share pins, people can share cards. So do you really know that that right individual is in that space or not? You have a good guess, but you're not really 100% sure. So facial authentication allows us to set ourselves apart from other multimodal authentication because it can be completely non-intrusive. You come up, if you belong, your access is granted. Tying that to the card that exists today on top of the infrastructure that exists today, if there's already a card reader in place, it's just a simple tie-in to what's already in place today, and it adds another layer of authentication that the individual accessing the area doesn't even know exists. So they don't have to pay attention to it. They don't have to look in a certain area. They access the area just like they did before, but now your level of security is increased.
Yeah, this was, it wouldn't be a good webinar though without a little bit of the fear, uncertainty, and doubt in there. But that multimodal, and you mentioned it earlier, is just in the changing work environments, the security cost of security breaches continue to grow, and as people continue to find ways to beat systems, we're seeing a lot of our customers have less physical security staff on site, or as I think you alluded to earlier, the same number of security staff on site, but their employees are coming back to work at different hours. You see office buildings staying open later so that you've got that physical distancing and things like that. And so it becomes cost prohibitive to have the security staff on site for all those hours. So being sure that people are being authenticated in more and more ways is becoming important. I think the other one we want to talk to, it's kind of a sub-trend, a trend within the trend here, Greg, is that we often get told when we're out talking to customers that tailgating is not a technology challenge. It's a behavioral challenge. But today's technology has now gotten to that point where the technology can help solve the behavioral challenges. Talk a little bit about that and how we're seeing that trend grow as well.
Sure. So if it's a high secure environment, the one area that truly prevents tailgating is either a circle lock or a man trap. And those are very expensive solutions. Outside of those solutions, multi-factor authentication isn't really going to prevent the behavioral challenge of two people entering a door when one person provided credentials. And so how do you identify that problem is even a problem, or that occurrence is even taking place? We did a deployment about a month ago with a customer, and they received over 100 tailgating alerts in a week, and they were astonished. They said something's wrong with the system. So they went back and looked at the cameras and aligned it with the tailgating alerts they were getting from our solution, and realized, no, they had a major behavioral problem. So the next step was, how do they fix that behavioral issue and prevent that tailgating from happening? But they couldn't even capture the data at the outset of identifying how big is this problem, because the technology they had in place couldn't identify that there was even a problem. So with the ROC, we're able to use AI and machine learning to identify that face that's close to the reader that's doing the authentication, and then identify if there's anybody else that's in that space and that also enters that area, and be able to send an alert to the back-end system. Again, native to the applications that are in place today, whether that's the video management system or the access control system, that alert can be sent and can be acted on. So I think the biggest piece here, tailgating, people, I think 70% of enterprises say that they have a problem, but only 15% are doing anything about it. Big part of that is the fact that they can't quantify how big that problem is. And so with solutions like the ROC, you're able to quantify that and then create that behavioral change, whether that's, we'll touch on this on the cloud side as well, but whether that's sending mobile alerts over the cloud to the violator to let them know that they're not adhering to policy.
Yeah, I think our marketing team's on an offsite today. We're in a meeting space, and down the hallway is a healthcare provider that I'm going to have to follow up with. But you see a person walking in the morning carrying their briefcase, coffee, and donuts, and the person just may not know who they are. Let them come in, because you don't want to be the guy who turned away the guy with coffee and donuts. But was that person really an employee or there for nefarious behavior? So that, I think a lot of people in that tailgating, the behavioral solution there is going to be a really critical aspect in giving people that data there. And so nice transition, Greg. You mentioned there on living on the edge. We're seeing a lot of cloud adoption. IPVM had a nice little article this week about a survey on the VSaaS that there's that adoption's growing. It may have slowed a little bit in the last year, but cloud is definitely the future. It is being adopted. But having that powerful computer processing on the edge is really important in that physical security market. So share with us what we're seeing and what we're hearing in the marketplace.
Sure. So when you start talking about physical security and cloud, I think people get nervous because decisions need to be made immediately. And if you belong, you're not going to wait for some communication to go back to a cloud to make a decision and rely on whatever network connections there to then determine whether you should be in that building or not. Certainly, if you belong, you're going to be more frustrated than somebody who doesn't belong. But if you belong and it takes a while for that door to open, it's not going to work. So that means you need to have much more high processing at the door to make decisions at the door, and not to rely on the cloud to make those decisions. That being said, having a combination of having a high-powered device that can make decisions at the door, that can transmit data behind the scenes to the cloud to keep everything basically in line, to keep all those devices in line, and to manage those devices remotely is really the benefit of the cloud. You mentioned earlier integration as being a key issue and having to touch various points of the software if there's an integration in place. Well, the cloud offering, if there's something that needs to be deployed, it can be done instantaneously. That hotfix can be done over the cloud immediately, rather than waiting for somebody to walk around to a reader and use a config card to configure the reader on site. So the cloud offers a lot of benefits as it relates to the security infrastructure and keeping everything in sync.
Well, and both that, we talked a little bit about, the data shows these growth rates are both for edge computing and cloud computing, but you see things like CRM driven by Salesforce and those things that people view are completely cloud, but there's also adding edge computing products to those. So edge computing is growing very rapidly. It's not going to go away. Cloud computing is growing very, very rapidly. It's not going to go away. And we should have added in here, but there's some recent data that biometrics is just the biometrics as a service is growing at 18% annually, and it'll be a $60-80 billion business this next couple of years as well. So the combination of edge, cloud, and biometrics is a very, very fascinating place, a high growth place, and I think something that we're going to see continue over the next months, years, and even decades. And I think you touch on these. I'll just share this slide. Greg, anything else that we may have missed in our discussion there that we want to make sure we're talking about?
I think the one point I wanted to note as it relates to cloud is being able to extend beyond the touch points that an on-prem solution would be able to do. So if something is managed in the cloud, as we talked about tailgating or piggybacking or some of the behavioral changes as it relates to physical security, by leveraging the cloud, you're able to address the behavior issue of that individual that actually is committing the violation. So you can send a mobile alert, you can send a text, you can use another platform to be able to change that behavior immediately right when it happens, rather than having some back-end system create an alert that then needs to be built out a report that then needs to have somebody analyze it and then send an email out to various violators or for an investigation. So it allows for very quick, instantaneous results as it relates to changing that behavior, which actually should drive change. I think some of the other pieces here, working with the existing components that are in place today. I touched on that earlier, but being able to leverage whatever access control system is in place with no change to that back end allows for faster and easier adoption.
Yeah, that was joined the company. One of the interesting use cases we're seeing a lot of companies that are going on merger acquisition work that might acquire a company that has an office in the same town, and they have a different access control system. But by the power of edge computing, they can put a rock in that system, a rock in the other system, use the cloud to kind of merge their databases and not have to rip and replace their access control system. So it gives them the ability to improve that security rapidly without great cost and scale and manage the business and the merger a lot better than they could before. So some interesting things that technology is going to allow for that in the past were expensive rips and replacing and expensive projects. So
great. And just to touch on, you mentioned the word ROC a few times, and so for those that aren't familiar, a ROC or the ROC is the name of Alcatraz's product. So just to tie those two together for those that aren't familiar.
Yeah, that absolutely. Thanks, Greg. Being the marketing guy, I assume everybody knows all about our product already.
They probably do.
More to do. So those, we'd love to get some of your questions there too. But the trends, we know that frictionless world is going to be important. It's going to be the future. We've got to make things easy on the administrators, easy on the end users. We have to keep privacy front and center, and we need to be disciplined. We need to have the right approaches to that, follow the best practices, and educate employees. And I think we will start seeing, as we've seen with a couple of customers, as we're seeing with air travel, the end users will actually start pulling us to that frictionless and biometric access control. The good news on that is we can do more on the multimodal. We can do more with biometrics than we could do before, making it easier to keep places safe and secure while eliminating friction. And then the technology continues to improve and get better and better. We used to work in the computer industry, and we talked about how things got smaller, faster, and cheaper. And we're seeing that with the biometric world as well. So a lot of good opportunity to come there, and a lot of neat things happening. And it's fun to be a part of. And these trends and what our customers are sharing with us is really going to drive that development and drive what the future looks like. So that's Steve. I don't know if you have anything you wanted to add to it and join us, or some questions for us, but we'd love to.
No, thanks a lot. This has been very compelling. Since I've only been around for about 3 decades in the security industry, I've certainly seen the biometrics migrate from a novelty and something that was overpromised and underdelivered 30-something years ago to an integral and invaluable tool. But there certainly still are some questions that need to be answered when we talk about biometrics, especially when we talk about the boogeyman of biometric, which is facial. And we've got a question here that I'd like to throw out to you both. Because we throw these terms around about facial recognition and facial authentication, but they're not the same, are they not? What are the differences, and how are they nuanced?
Tad, you want to take it? You want me to take it? I'll let you take that one first.
All right,
I'll
sure.
add on.
All right, great. So facial recognition, think of it in a surveillance type of an environment where an individual is recorded, and then a backend database is searched to identify who that individual is. Facial authentication differs from that because facial authentication implies the opt-in, as Tad was mentioning. So you opt into that platform, you go through an enrollment process, and then your data is compared against that enrolled data. So when you approach the next time, if you belong, you're authenticated and allowed through, versus if you have not enrolled, then you won't even be looked at as an individual that should be authenticated. So it's more of that opt-in approach to authenticate the individual and not recognize them or not search some backend database to find out who they are.
Yeah, I think as I've joined the company and learned about that, it's really, I think it's sometimes as simple as I understand is that when somebody puts that badge against the reader, the system knows that badge is authentic and that person can get in. In this case, the face becomes the badge. It's looking at it just like it is that badge and authenticates that, yes, that is somebody who's supposed to be in here, but it doesn't know that it's Tad. It doesn't know that it's Greg. It doesn't know that it's Steve. It just knows that that person has been authenticated, and like their badge, they can get in here. But unlike their badge, I can't use Greg's face. I can't use Steve's face. So the system knows it's the right person. And even if somebody got into the system and pulled out my data, there's no way for them to know and recreate the fact that that is Tad and see what I look like or know that it's me, unless they tied it back to my HR records. And in that case, they've gotten into the system at a level that's going to be a real problem. So it's more about authentication, not recognition. And the words have different meanings, and that's what we're trying to educate the world on.
Very good. Another point about biometrics is back in the earlier technology days, there was a lot of concern about the speed of biometrics, especially when you talked about throughput and how it was employed with various access control devices, hardware devices. When we're looking at biometrics today and their popularity in certain industry segments, it obviously is it seems to be gaining a lot of steam in large applications where you have, say, like in harsh environments where you've got work crews outside, where there's large construction sites or mining sites or agricultural sites, and those are teamed with with turnstiles or other type of deterrents. But because biometrics are becoming so ubiquitous, are there applications that are more apropos than others, or is it pretty much across the board now that biometrics will fit almost any application?
There's two main areas, I would say, where biometrics is used. It's deployed in those high secure areas, replacing some other form of multi-factor authentication, now moving to face to make that more frictionless. Or it's in I would put it in the ease of use category. So it's basically allowing people to enter spaces much easier than they could in the past, while adding a higher level of security. So as far as actual industries, data centers drive a lot of the multi-factor authentication, but financial services, large corporate enterprises where you have a lot of people coming into a building, so large cities with, whether it be New York or Silicon Valley, large corporate headquarters, that type of thing, where you kind of have the start of the day where everybody's coming in and the end of the day that you need to know that everybody's out. So in that frictionless environment, but those are the main buckets I would put in: high security or frictionless. And what we're seeing is those two worlds start to blend a little bit.
Okay, yeah, I think that some of the use cases that we're seeing, we've got universities that are, the rec centers, the kids, if they forget their student ID, they have to give a driver's license. And every Friday night there's 150 driver's license sitting at the rec center at the front desk, and but that people had no problem leaving their driver's license with all their personal information there to get in, and then they forget it. And that challenge. Now they're using the facial authentication. Once they're enrolled, it's seamless to walk in and move, and it's more secure. The university knows who's there. They know when they get there. All those things are based on their student ID stuff. So, I think, as you mentioned, Steve, we're starting to fulfill the promise. The technology is getting better, and I think that's, as I've talked to our customers, getting them to think differently about the use of biometrics other than those high security areas that Greg mentioned is kind of one of the fun things that we're getting to do. Seeing the hospitals put them in not just labor and delivery and not just IT infrastructure, but in employee lounges and other areas where they just want to make sure that they're protecting their people and their property.
One of the unique areas that one of our customers deployed is in the stairwell, where that isn't often used, but some people go step out in the stairwell and smoke. And when they turn around and come back in, who's following them in that door? And so to prevent tailgating in these areas that you would certainly never have a security guard, but to automate that process and have an automated security guard in those areas that aren't often used adds that greater layer of protection.
Yeah, and another interesting one, Steve, was kind of a grocery. At the pandemic, now we have all this curbside delivery.
Right.
And the delivery the delivery people, they come out, they go deliver, and when they've forgotten their badge to get back into the delivery area, they have to walk all the way around the grocery facility, and that's 3-4 minute walk in there, and just the lost productivity, lost time.
Right. Being
able to just walk up, use your face as a credential, and get in and out, and know that it's a person who's authorized to be there. It's just little simple things that you just don't think about until you see it in action.
And to me, that's been one of the biggest changes I've seen over the years. Is again, biometrics used to be reserved for high security or large enterprise applications. And now, because again, the price points have come down, and the technology is a lot more conducive to small or middle class businesses. You're seeing a lot more of those type of applications, which is really good for the technology. We got one gentleman here. When you were throwing out your descriptions about authentication, just kind of threw up some what ifs. What about 3-factor authentication? What about 4-factor authentication? What about 2D and 3D? You have any comments on those?
Sure. So multi-factor authentication, adding another layer of security, can be done with our product. So if 2-factor authentication using a PIN and a card is used today, you can layer a face on as a 3rd factor. Basically, the face becomes the gatekeeper for all those factors, and once authenticated, the backend system still sees the WEGIND or OSTP data for the badge and receives the PIN data as it normally would over that same channel. You can even layer on a fingerprint solution in addition to face. So it's another layer of protection, and it's basically because our solution just acts as the badge system, sending the badge data back to the access control system. That would still happen as normally would take the case. So the access control system in the end is going to power the door and will tell it whether to unlock or remain locked. And that's where the Alcatraz solution sits in and communicates with the backend access control to make that happen.
Okay. And Greg, you might add on that. We're seeing less need, like not there was a ton of, but for 4-factor authentication. If your facial authentication system has liveness detection, it can't be spoofed, like some of the, Steve mentioned some of the challenges of facial recognition early on, where you could hold up a photo of somebody and get in. That liveness detection, 3D detection, you're sometimes eliminating, or you can eliminate that need for another biometric on top of that.
I think that's what the question was related to, 2D versus 3D. And yes, the Alcatraz solution does use 3D technology, not just through the camera itself, but also to allow us to gauge individuals' depth, how far individuals are away from the door, to detect tailgating. That's where a lot of our AI layers on top of not just the camera feed, but the Alcatraz special sauce, which is what's happening in the space. Basically looking at this from a smart imaging standpoint, what's happening in the field of view, so that we can make smart decisions around that. And again, that drives the need to have a high-powered device at the edge. So you need to have that compute power to make those decisions instantaneously.
Greg, let me follow up with you on the question here we have from Ray Bernard, who was saying that when you mentioned the circle lock turnstiles, he knows, and we had a couple other folks ask this. I know circle locks as meaning a tubular lock that uses a round key. What are you referring to?
Sure. So Circle Lock is a Boone Edom brand for their large, think of it as large revolving door. Right. And okay. So it's take that cylinder, drop it on its head, and make it about 10 feet large, and then you've got your Circle Lock, which is different from a tubular lock. Yes. So think of it as a a different type of a turnstile with a revolving door in the center.
Very good. And again, we've got another gentleman who said that he came into the webinar late and he heard you mentioned it, but he wants to know, is your rock transparent to existing legacy non-cloud-based systems like Carry or Paxton?
Yes. Yep. So we can work with any access control system. Our cloud offering just layers on top and allows the cloud to manage the rocks that are in the deployment, and to manage the data that's on each individual rock on each door. But the access control system that's in place today absolutely can be on-prem, and in many cases is.
Very good. This is an interesting question, and I'm right there with the person asking it. Is you threw out the term biometrics as a service, and they said, I'm not familiar with that concept. Can you discuss this a bit more in detail? And that, they want to know, is it just another form of cloud access control?
I think it's a good question. I think right now it's in the use case for cloud, it is a use case within cloud access control, but there are other offerings that are biometrics as a service, for instance, in healthcare for patient care, where they use an iPad to make sure that the patient getting the drugs in that bed is the patient that was supposed to be in that bed, and that's controlled through the cloud, updated regularly and all that. So it's like video as a service, biometrics as a service, CRM as a service. It's a version of cloud offering on biometrics. And with the biometrics, we offer hardware as a service, or to an extent it is biometrics as a service, because you get all those upgrades. When we add a new feature, when we add new functionality through the cloud, you get that upgrade without having to do anything in the system. So it's very similar to the other as a services that are out there.
So it's no different than me being on a Microsoft OS platform, and when they update the service, I get that seamlessly implanted in my software.
Yeah,
that's right. And it also provides greater flexibility for the buyer, because the buyer doesn't have to buy everything up front as a capital expenditure, but they can make it an operational expense as a service.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got a gentleman would like to know, when you're dealing with facial recognition, how do you handle masks, scarves, sunglasses, etc.?
We can't talk much about facial recognition, so I'll talk about facial authentication since we made that determination earlier.
Right.
But as it relates to facial authentication, you need to have a smart solution. You need to have a solution that uses machine learning to not only identify the face that's enrolled, but to continue to evaluate that face and to see have there been changes. Steve, did you shave recently or not? And so you're going to look differently with a beard and without a beard. So how do we detect that? We detect glasses on, glasses off, hat on, hat off, scarf on, off. So if you had all those changes, you wore a scarf, sunglasses, hat, shaved, and all of a sudden there was a lot of change to your face, that might create more of an issue than if you just change one item. The back end needs to be able to constantly be learning at the environment, back to the smart imaging space. So we're not just identifying against a static enrolled data, but in fact, taking a look at that data set and saying, okay, I recognize who you are, but there is something that's different here from a data set. Obviously the computer isn't looking at it like our eyes and mind do. They're not seeing glasses, but they are seeing that the system is seeing different data points and saying, okay, so I recognize who you are, but I recognize that there's some difference. So let me store that difference and append the enrolled data. So now I have a better approach of what you look like now with glasses on. As humans, we would see you with glasses on. So same thing with a hat, same thing with a scarf, same thing with shaved or having a beard. So that enrolled data actually gets smarter over time. So your experience doesn't degrade over time. It's not going to get better over time because it should work every time if you belong, but it retains that same experience as time goes on and as you change. So the smart systems are using machine learning and AI to do that.
And I think that's an important kind of differentiation in the market, is that more and more important. A lot of facial recognition was on an enrollment photo, and that's what it's vying to. In a facial authentication, it's looking at you, and particularly in the new work environment, you may only go into that office once a month, once every 60 days, but still being able to, and you can lose a lot of weight in that time frame or grow a beard and a mustache, but being able to still understand and authenticate who the person is becomes more and more important in the new work environment.
And Tad, just to that point, you made a very good point there, which is if we were reliant on the badge data that was taken when that photo was taken, and so if the enrollment process was take all the badge data and then match against that, your matching would be very poor, because that enrollment data could be several years old and usually done off a camera that wasn't great at the time. If you look at the quality of many of the badges. So that data is not a great data set to start your matching. And so again, some of the facial systems in the past didn't live up. Steve, you mentioned this, some of the old biometric solutions just didn't live up to all their claims. That's part of the reason why. If you're trying to match against poor data, you're going to get poor results. So you need to have good data and then have that continually be updated.
It's not a lot of fun to re-enroll the CEO when she gets new glasses every time. So that's
no, not at all. But again, we're playing in a different era too now. In technology, when we're talking about biometrics, as your name implies, I mean, artificial intelligence and machine learning has just brought a whole new level of what the capabilities of biometrics, and again, where they can be applied. Again, the jury's out. Is still out on some sort, some types of AI applications, but as far as they relate to biometrics, what's the frontier for AI and biometrics?
You look like you were going to answer, Ted.
Well, I was just thinking this is where we want Vince on there. Vince, our founder, was part of the team that developed the facial authentication at Apple, right. and he saw so many different uses for that. So there's a vision of it. I think I'll let Greg answer, but I just see things that as it gets better and cheaper and so on. I'd love to have this on my back door when I'm not when I'm carrying in the groceries, so I don't drop them, and it just opens my door. There's just so many use cases that there's a lot of people smarter than me that need to go help us.
But from a security and risk standpoint, what are we looking at?
Yeah, so I think if you look at the Rock, we have a head-high camera that's able to analyze. You've got eyes in a lot of different areas. So if you just look at it, just adding to your VMS, now you have a great visual. The AI comes in. Now what can you see within that screen and make decisions on? Are there certain materials in that room that shouldn't be there? Is there a bag that's been left in a corner for 20 minutes that shouldn't be there? So layering AI on top of this to say, here's the scene and this is what it looks like. This is what it should look like. But now I'm seeing some anomalies. Let's direct your eyes to that footage so somebody that is sitting in an operations center can look at the relevant data. That's just one example of where AI is being used, in camera-based systems. As it relates to access, we're already on the frontier and we'll continue to refine this, but how many people do we see in the scene? Can we measure the intent of how many people are coming to that door? Does that individual that we identify, are they the one that entered, or did they unlock it and then somebody else entered the building? So all that has to be done using AI. It's not going to be done using actual manual decision-based solutions.
And especially in this post-pandemic and I guess world of a little more social turmoil than we've seen in the last decade, all those are so much more critical to protecting facilities and people, for sure.
I think we're going to see a step towards mustering, better mustering as well. Yep. So as people exit a building in an emergency, understanding who's in the building, where they are. The people counting, which is relatively simple. You don't need a very smart AI to do that, but it needs to be very fast. And so if you think about a panic situation, your people counting needs to be right. And if 4 people exit the door at the same time, you need to be able to distinguish that.
Most definitely. Let's finish it off with one last question, and this would sort of put the bow on this, I think, and I'll let both of you chime in here. So what would you recommend as some of the most common best practices for end users to use when they're talking about implementing, deploying, and then training subsequently when that system's in, as far as a biometric access control system?
Pat, go ahead. I'll jump in after you.
I was going to be nice and let you go first. I think, I'll look at it from a communications and marketing perspective. Is from my perspective, making sure that the employees, as you're doing this, that you've got those systems, processes, and you're sharing with them how you're using the artificial intelligence, what are you using it for, how it protects them and keeps them safe, and making sure that you're getting that understanding and buy-in. That can help eliminate a lot of the potential challenges down the line. And I think also, as you explain to them from the benefit perspective of not just the safety and security, but the benefit of them being able to go do their job, do it efficiently, know that they're safe and secure while they're doing it. I think that's a key component that we often forget when we're talking about the video or the physical security world.
Yeah, to add to that, the enrollment process, and there was another question on this, so maybe I'll get two birds with one stone here. But the enrollment process, as much as you can align that and use AI to make that process go smoothly, so you don't have to go necessarily. Again, customers have their own security parameters, but one option is to use auto enrollment. So if you're currently using your badge to enter a facility, to be able to have a reader on the door that automatically enrolls that individual while they're just using their card-based solution as they normally have. And then once the system has enough data that says, okay, I see who you are, I can recognize who you are, that enrollment data is stored, and then the solution can be used immediately using facial authentication instead of using the card. So you can go from a single-factor card-based system to a single-factor face-based system. So having that machine learning and AI be used for the enrollment process to make that a smoother process is something that's a nice to have when you're rolling this out individually, and gets people enrolled quickly, so you don't have to have a situation where the IT or the security person's in on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and you need to meet that with them at 1 o'clock. And they'll be sitting there vetting your identity to enroll you and to take you through that process. Of course, we do have customers on the high security side of the spectrum that say, I love your auto enrollment capability, but that's a security flaw, not a feature. And I want people to come into my office and I want to vet their identity and enroll them. But that enrollment process needs to take less than 20 seconds. It can't be a long process.
Right.
No, and I think, Greg, that's a good point. When you look at 10 to 15% of all badges are lost or need replaced each year. If you have an enterprise of 10,000 employees, that's a lot of lost time that enrollment process can alleviate.
Very good. Well, I lied. We had someone jump in here at the last minute, and he's got a good question. So and it's an end user. You always want an end user asking questions. So the question is, how do you obtain the person's image? Do they send a digital photo, or do they need to be physically present to have their face scanned upon initial enrollment?
Sure. So we think at Alcatraz, we believe that having somebody physically there is critical, and you have to make that a benefit and not a detriment to them. So again, it comes back to, if you just took a photo, you'd have two-dimensional data that's the only thing that you're matching. So your security level is now going to be based on two-dimensional data and probably be suspect to someone using an iPad or something and getting through the system. So they need to be physically there so we can capture the three-dimensional data as well as the two-dimensional data. But that enrollment process has to be very quick, less than 20 seconds. Think of your cell phone. No one needed to coach you through that process on how to enroll your face. There were a couple messages. Said look up, to look down, move your face around, gets different angles of your face, and that's it. And that's the experience that we want to provide at the door, is that same as using your mobile device of being able to come up and do a very simple authentication at the door for enrollment. Of course, long-term plans are to push that enrollment to a mobile device so that people can kind of pre-enroll, and that would get them up, basically allow them to have most of the data into the solution, but then adding on the three-dimensional data when they're in front of the rock itself.
All right. Well, I want to thank everybody who attended today's program. We had a very engaged audience, and you all stuck through it to the end, and we appreciate that. But it's not surprising since Tad and Greg were very compelling on the insights they were providing here on biometrics and access control, and some of the compliance and legal issues, privacy issues that we're facing with this technology. Just as a reminder, I want to let you all know that this webinar will be archived on our site for 6 months following today's presentation, and you will receive an email notification once that has occurred. Those of you who stayed on the line, you'll be receiving your certificates of attendance to try and obtain CEU credits. If you'd like to access more of our webinars, you can visit our website at securityinfowatch.com/webinars for a whole library of them. Thanks again, Tad, Greg, we appreciate it. And we'll see everyone on December 7th for our next webinar. So stay tuned for promotions on that. And until then, everybody stay safe, and we'll see you on the 7th.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Steve.
Steve.